The BYU Cougars and Arizona State Sun Devils square off on Saturday afternoon, maybe the most anticipated game in both programs' histories. We're serious about that. This is a Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You place a $5 bet with our friends at FanDuel today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if your first $5 bet hits. It's as simple as that. Get started today at FanDuel.com. All right, Richie Bradshaw, we got a big game on Saturday afternoon down there in Tempe. I said it in the open, and I really believe this. Is this the biggest game in both these programs' histories, considering the stakes that are attached to it?
I'd say so. This is certainly the biggest game the Sun Devils have had in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, around this time, ASU hosted Notre Dame. It was a top 15, it might have been a top 10 matchup for what was the first ever college football playoff. And ASU was able to take down Notre Dame in that game before wetting the bed shortly after against Oregon State, of all teams, and losing their chance to go to the first ever playoff. We have not had a game nearly of that magnitude since then. And a huge reason of that has been because ASU just, it felt like they peaked at that point in time, and we just have not been able to get back to that point. Of course, this was not the year we were expecting to get to that point, and I'm sure BYU feels the same way. This has been a very magical season for ASU, and yeah, this is a huge game. There's Big 12 championship games on the line, or championship game is on the line, and a potential college football playoff appearance is on the line for both of these teams. If they find ways to win out, there is a very, very good chance that we find ourselves in the first ever 12-team playoff format.
Well, and that's the thing about this is ASU, I think most people know this, was picked dead last in the preseason poll in the Big 12. BYU, not much better, 13th. And Richie, I'm just speaking from my side of things, from the BYU perspective. The fact that the Cougars are 9-1 when we were kind of talking all summer long about, hey, can they get to 6-6? Can you get the bowl eligibility? And I would imagine your conversations probably were similar with regards to Sun Devils fans. But it's pretty, you mentioned magical. What has led to ASU's rise? Because I'll kind of share what BYU's done to this point, but is it just essentially the magic of Kenny Dillingham taking over that program that has led to this magical outcome for the Sun Devils?
I'd say that's pretty much the catalyst for everything. This was a very defeated program after everything that Herm Edwards did his best to do to drive us into the worst situation possible. Kenny Dillingham said something that is just flat out true. After the team's win over Kansas State, he said, typically, when you are hired to a program that's going through any kind of sanctions, you're hired to be fired. It's just, we've seen that time and time again. And yet in year two of this complete rebuild for ASU, they're already contending. And people have called Arizona State University the sleeping giant for longer than I've been alive. And there's a million reasons for that. But one of the biggest reasons is that there's so many resources here in the Valley, as we call it, to unlock that potential. And Kenny Dillingham has unlocked that potential. And in the meantime, he's had these kids that are coming to this program, whether they're true freshmen, whether they're transfers everywhere else. He says, this is the standard. This is the culture that we are implementing. You buy into it, or there's hundreds of other programs for you. And these kids, these 18-year-olds, these 22, 23-year-olds, they have bought in and they have created what we are seeing at ASU. And that's one of the reasons why this was what I had hoped for in year 3 or year 4, but it's already here in year 2. It's not going away. And as long as it's not, ASU is going to find themselves being competitors more often than not.
Well, and the really cool thing about these two programs is as you have already alluded to, Kenny Dillingham is an ASU alum. Kalani Sitake up here at BYU, he's a BYU alum. He talks about all the time that he grew up a BYU fan. And Kenny's talked in similar tones about growing up around ASU and it just being his dream job. And I think it's important for programs like a BYU and like an Arizona State to have, quote, one of their own, for lack of a better term, running these programs, because they understand the unique aspects of these universities. BYU is a religious institution. It's a private school. There are things about it that don't exist literally anywhere else in the country. And then ASU, you have to understand, as you mentioned, what the Valley has to offer to these young men to sell it to them. I have loved watching what Kenny Dillingham has done. And we'll talk about Cam Skattebo here in just a minute, but you hear that he's already got his own burger down there in the Valley.
I'm going to try it tomorrow night.
Oh, you are? Okay. So
I am.
Yeah. So it just, the stuff like that, the fact that he can sell it as well as he has done, I think it screams exactly kind of what we've seen with BYU over the 9 years that Kalani Sitake has been here in Provo, is that they know what these universities are all about and why they are the best representatives to lead these respective programs.
It's huge. I truly believe that having the investment in your program and in your university is one of the things that's going to take you off the ground. And we've seen tons of times that people will go back to their university, say, this is my dream job, and then they end up leaving. But it's those guys that stick around, your Mike Gundys, your Kyle Whittinghams, your Kalani Sitakes. What a coincidence. They all have something in common. I don't know what it is. Maybe something about the Big 12, that they stay and they grow this program. And that's what you're hoping Kenny Dillingham is when he says, hey, this is my dream job, that you believe him and that he is going to stay. And I don't have any reason to not believe in him to go anywhere else. And hopefully a new athletic director with Graham Rossini will also understand that. And a university president in Michael Crow, who has seemingly started to catch on a little bit. He's a bit of an old head, but it seems like he's starting to go with the flow here. And they're going to realize, yeah, we need to keep these guys in the Valley, because look how they are building this university up. Look how quickly the team is bought in. The student section has never been more lively than it is. You're getting people from alumni to people who just grew up in the Valley to be Arizona State fans to invest in this program again. Everything's going the right way right now. They need to make sure they lock him up because, yeah, like you said for Sitake, this is a guy who understands what it means to be an Arizona State Sun Devil, and you're seeing the benefits of it already within 2 years of the program. Things are looking up.
Now, real quick, I also wanted to ask you, I've seen BYU, just from my vantage point, they've invested pretty heavily since going into the Big 12. And I've been around BYU my entire life. I'm an alum of the university, all that type of stuff. And I've talked about this on my podcast a lot. I've always talked about BYU, and they had like this sick fantasy of being like, we do more with less. And it was like, okay, great. Do more with less. But guess what? Do more with more. Speaking of actual like dollars invested into the program. And essentially, since BYU got the invite in 2021, there has been, we're talking large investments in improving BYU. Now, BYU is not going to throw just a pile of cash at the football program. They like to do it strategically. But give me a sense, is ASU giving, we talk about Rossini, also talk about Kenny Dillingham, are they getting the funding and the investment that they need, as you mentioned, to stay put and feel comfortable?
They are. And there was a movement that started when Kenny Dillingham first got here. A little hashtag called Activate the Valley.
Yeah. Okay.
And the idea behind that was, you are one of the biggest metropolitan cities in the entire United States. You are one of the biggest universities in the world with several campuses scattered throughout the state. You've got everything to offer from not just an athletic standpoint, because I mean, there's women's rugby, there's a hockey team, there's swim and dive, there's baseball, football, basketball. They've got everything to offer athletically, but they got everything to offer academically as well. That's one of the things that we can thank Michael Crow for, is the way that he's built up everything. So when you've got a place like Arizona State that seemingly has everything to offer you, from athletics to academics to online schooling on campus with just places everywhere, there's no reason for ASU to not be able to catch up for these places. It was one of the things that I said on the Big 12 squad, I think 2 weeks ago. If you guys haven't checked those out, you should check them out. They are a ton of fun. But one of the things that all the guys were having fun with was, well, what happens when people outbid you for Kenny Dillingham? And I'm like, well, that's the thing. When ASU gets to that point, they're going to be able to match or outbid everybody else as well. I'm not saying you turn into an Alabama dynasty or a Georgia dynasty, but you can start competing like an Alabama or Georgia based off of the NIL that's in your backyard. And it's already getting to that point. We still have a long ways to go. And the difference in a year, it's insane. I mean, you pointed out Cam Skattebo. He's got the Skattebo-rito at Burrito Express. He's got the Skattaburger at Cold Beer and Cheeseburgers, which I'm trying tomorrow night with a bunch of my buddies. Could not be more excited. We didn't see this stuff in previous years. And Skattebo's doing it. And you know that a lot of other guys are getting primed for that kind of stuff as well. So, like I said, future's bright. And that's the biggest reason, is having guys who understand what it takes to get there.
Now, the biggest thing is BYU and ASU share a unique connection because there are a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints down there in the Valley. It's just a simple fact of life. So you have to be of a certain age to remember this, Richie, that there used to be a rivalry in a conference between the Sun Devils and the Cougars. And we're going to delve more into that momentarily and see if that can be reignited right here on a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils. Today's show is brought to you by our friends, a new friend of the podcast over here at Skylight Frames. Now, a lot of us going into the holiday season, all of us are kind of looking at what we can get for our family and friends. And a lot of us, we may be separated by a fair distance. What you can do with our friends at Skylight Frames is you can give them this frame that allows all of you that have these frames to upload your photos to them, essentially stay up to date with everything going on. I can tell you from having grandparents who lived a ways away, they love seeing those photos. It may be an aunt or an uncle, no matter who it is. If you come from a big family, it can be hard and expensive. Buy each one a personal gift for the holidays. So why not make it easy and do it with our friends over at Skylight Frames? You can add new photos straight from your phone from anywhere. It only takes a tap on your phone to send new photos to a frame across the country. It's the fastest and easiest way to keep loved ones in the loop, even better than Facebook or anything else out there. They'll feel so much more connected to you and stay up to date with you as well. And they'll use a touch screen. It's a game changer. Swipe through those photos, tap to see new photos, tap the heart button to say thank you to the sender. And it's just as simple as 1, 2, 3 with a very easy to use app, and they have satisfaction guaranteed. That they are so confident you'll love Skylight. They offer free 120-day returns. So take advantage of special limited time offer for our listeners on Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils. Get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight frame. You go to skylightframe.com/college. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME. That's skylightframe.com/lockedoncollege. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/college. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, as they are America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. It's as simple as that, my friends. A lot of us out there, big NFL fans, if you want to stay up to date on everything going on in the NFL, do it with our friends at FanDuel, because right now you can go on the app and it gives you everything you need to place those bets live. You get a hunch in the middle of a game, check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Once again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. That's FanDuel.com to get started today. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first view and or listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Richie Bradshaw along for the ride here. All right, so Richie, I've got a grandfather who talked to me often about the old WAC. And what I mean by the old WAC is we're talking the 1960s and 1970s, and ASU and Arizona were founding members alongside BYU of that conference. And they had some pretty epic battles. The Frank Kush era is obviously indelibly etched in the mind of a lot of ASU Sun Devils fans, and that comes from that era. But it's been nearly 50 years since these programs have been in the same conference. I'm actually wearing an old school BYU hoodie today, kind of throwing it back to 97 when these two programs, I think, last played in Tempe, if I'm not mistaken. And are you excited for this, to have them back in the same conference and hopefully reignite that rivalry that existed for quite a while there?
I certainly am. And I love that you brought up the rivalry going all the way back to the Western Athletic Conference. And it's it's one of the biggest pieces of ASU football history was getting to the Western Athletic Conference. And it was a big justification of, wow, they're taking a big step forward as a football program. They're joining not an elite, but an established football conference back in the 60s and 70s. And Frank Kush was someone that was getting ASU off to a really good start. They are considered, quote unquote, like the founders of the Sun Bowl, because ASU was so involved with going to that on a pretty consistent basis and everything like that. So making your way over to the Western Athletic Conference was huge for them to get to that point. It's so funny. I know this information, but I couldn't tell you many of the teams back then. And knowing that BYU was one of them, not a surprise at all. Like, logistically, it makes a lot of sense from when we used to have importance on regions for lining up different college programs and whatnot. God, I miss that. But that's not a surprise. And yeah, ASU has sparingly seen BYU over the last few years. They had that meeting in Tempe in 1997, and we played you guys in like 2021 in Provo.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I mean, we've barely seen you guys. One of the things that I was really curious about during the offseason when ASU joined Big 12 was I was kind of looking around and I was like, who could your new rivals be? Like, obviously, you're joining with Arizona, Colorado, Utah. Those are established. Texas Tech, you've played them a handful of times. Maybe not. Other than that, I'm like, I don't know any programs that truly stand out to me. And BYU kind of came up and it was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then you look into the history and you're like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's a generations old rivalry. Like you said, back to our grandparents. You said your grandpa taught it to you. My grandfather taught that stuff to me too. Yeah. Like, it's a generations old rivalry. So bringing it back to our generation and to I think there's 2 generations since me and you. Like, that's crazy to think about in itself, but neither here nor there. It's cool to bring that stuff back so that the younger generations, as they continue to come to this place, it's just fun. So igniting a new old rivalry, I think that's something that's really good for BYU and for ASU, and hopefully the rest of college football can appreciate it.
Well, and I think it is absolutely going to be reignited because I've got some family connections to the Valley. I've got in-laws and a brother and sister-in-law who married into the family who are from Arizona. And I can tell you, Richie, ASU is the hometown school, but a lot of them being members of the LDS faith, they're like, hey, I'm a little conflicted on all this. And I'm like, I get that because there's a huge contingent of church membership down there that I'm sure they're thinking, okay, I've supported ASU and also BYU, but when they come head to head, who am I going to support? And I think that in and of itself is going to create a rivalry because you're going to have these people who are from Arizona, who may be an active member of the LDS faith over here, but at the same time, like, hey, I've watched ASU and I've supported the Sun Devils. I'm looking forward to this. I think the conflict in and of itself is going to create a new rivalry element to it all.
Very much so. And this game sold out yesterday. Or Tuesday. Yeah. This game sold out on Tuesday. And I remember seeing pictures all across my Twitter feed because I follow a bunch of ASU fans. What a coincidence. And I'm sure you do the same thing for BYU. And they had posted screenshots when I jumped in and they were like, I logged in immediately. I am 62nd in line. I am this number in line. And it's like, holy cow. I can't remember the last time this happened. Game sells out. I believe this is a true sellout too. Like, ASU's had 2 sellouts this year. It's like, that's 90% capacity. This is going to be a sellout. And I'll tell you, there's going to be a lot of blue in that crowd. Like, I would love for it to be like an 80-20 split. I won't say it's 50-50. I think ASU gets the edge, but it's going to be loud no matter whose offense is on the field. It's going to be a lot of blue and a lot of gold.
Well, and that's the thing about it is I love Kenny Dillingham sitting down and being like, all right, you're selling your tickets. Make sure they go to an ASU fan. And
exactly.
Here's the thing. I love that. I love the fact that he's trying to build this up a little bit, because I do think that BYU looks at ASU as a very natural rivalry that can be reignited and just evolve into something, because obviously ASU and Arizona, the Territorial Cup is always going to be a thing. BYU and Utah, always going to be a thing. But being the western wing of the Big 12 as it stands right now, these 4 schools along with Colorado, I hope all 5 of them play each other, if not annually, semi-annually, and
Yes.
we're seeing them play often, because they need to have these regional rivalries built up and to have these fan bases get after one another, because that's the fun part about college football, is when you can have some rivalries that truly exist.
You need to start having the Holy War as your last game of the year.
I would hope so, yes.
That ASU has played the team down south every year, last game of the year, for God knows how long. And it's something that all of our fans look forward to on both sides. It's a very politically driven rivalry. It is a very athletically driven rivalry. There's no love lost between these two teams. You will hear a lot of people say there are 2 seasons for ASU football. There's the first 11 games, and then there's the last game of the year. There are also some people who will consider the entirety of a successful season based off of one game, and it's the Duel in the Desert. And it's beautiful, and it's one of the things that we love so much. And coming to the Big 12, I didn't really see a lot of big rivalries like that. I'm not sure of the biggest, most dynamic rivalries in the Big 12 right now. And my apologies to the other 14 teams who may be listening to this, but it truly doesn't feel like there's that duel in the desert, that there's that holy war, or, I mean, going out of the boundaries. Like, it's not a battle in LA. It's not Iron Bowl. It's not anything like that. And it doesn't need to be like an S-tier rivalry, but like you said, that's one of the things that conferences will feed off of. ASU and Arizona are bringing it. I truly hope in all my heart that BYU and Utah becomes an annual game. And I would love for it to be last week of the year when you get those kind of rivalries. It's one of the reasons I was so excited, not as an ASU fan, just joining the Big 12 in general, was seeing some of the teams coming with us. And I was like, BYU, Utah.
Yeah.
That has got to be an annual game.
Well, and that's the thing about it, is I think all of us up here in Utah wanted to see that game at the final weekend of the year, because when they were in the WAC and the Mountain West together, that's what it traditionally was. It was the final weekend of the season. Now, I will just also say this. BYU just lost to Kansas. And I will tell you, having conversations with both, and both BYU and Utah both lost the week after they played that rivalry game. BYU wins that game 22-21. Let's just put it this way, Richie. It's not a coincidence both of those teams lost the following week. The emotional tie to it, the overall expenditure of the energy that goes into it, both physically and emotionally, it catches up with both of those teams. So, yeah, I'm not surprised in some respects that BYU and Utah both lost the following week. And that's why I'm with you. I am telling, if Brett Yormark ever sees this podcast, Brett, please put the Holy War on the final weekend of the season. It just needs to happen, because these two schools, much like Arizona and Arizona State, you kind of gauge success of your season is on one game. I know that BYU's 9-1, and guess what? There's Cougar fans who are upset about them being 9-1, but a lot of them are saying at least it wasn't that one loss was not to Utah. Yep,
and it's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned the emotional high that you get off of those games. And I venture to think that for BYU and Utah, that rivalry game took a whole other level now that there are conference stakes involved. Because if BYU does not win that game against Utah, and if they slump against Kansas for the same reasons of the emotional high, if you're talking about 2 losses for BYU, this game against ASU is not just a, hey, your hopes are on the line. It is this is an elimination game from the Big 12. So that kind of stakes on the line. Ooh, yeah, sign me up for that every year, especially if, I won't say when, because Kyle Whittingham's probably gone, if Utah gets back to that point. And as long as BYU keeps doing what they're doing, because why wouldn't you with Kalani Sitake there? Yeah, I'm big on the alum stuff.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
You'll have those expectations every year, and it'll be great.
Yeah. Okay. You talk about elimination game. Well, this one, it's an elimination game. Whichever team wins this game probably sees themselves heading to Arlington, Texas for the Big 12 championship game. The other team, well, Alamo Bowl, something else. Who
Yeah.
knows what the future holds? But we'll delve into some keys to the game, what we expect to come be the outcome on Saturday. We'll get to that momentarily right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is here for you guys to have some fun when it comes to your gaming needs. That's what I love about Prize Picks is you have a really simple way to go about winning real money. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars on award winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long and do it with our friends over at Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times, once again, your money on Prize Picks as little as 4 correct picks. It's as simple as that. Once again, it's an over-under. That's as simple as it can get. It's the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. A lot of us have played daily fantasy. When you get a player that gets injured, you're like, oh crap, well, I'm screwed. Well, the best part is if your player leaves in the first half and does not return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live and helps you stay in the game. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you pay $5 overall. You don't even need to win it to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed simply by signing up and playing a $5 entry. The best part is it offers weekly promotions that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Pick discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. So take advantage today and get over to Prize Picks today. Download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get that $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's all courtesy over at Prize Picks. Of course, like they like to say, run your game. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first view and or listen of the day. Final stanza here with Richie Bradshaw from Locked On Sun Devils. Okay, so Richie, ASU 8-2, obviously trying to get a leg up on BYU in tiebreaker scenarios and all that type of stuff when it comes to a potential berth in the Big 12 title game. So I'm going to let you go first. What are the keys for ASU to come out with the W and, yeah, essentially tell BYU, thanks for playing, but you guys can have fun in the Alamo Bowl?
The biggest key to victory here is not really changing things up. Since the bye week, which the second bye week, I should say, the last 3 games for ASU, they have dominated offensively. They crushed Oklahoma State in Stillwater, which hasn't been the most difficult thing in the world this year, but it was still noteworthy. They come home, they're able to outscore UCF. Again, not the most notable thing in the year, but being able to put up points hasn't been a huge strength for ASU. And then last week, you go to the Little Apple and you outscore K-State. You beat the brakes off them in the first half, and then they put it on cruise control in the second half, which I didn't really agree with, but I mean, it was a win. So the reason they've been able to set up that success, though, has been Sam Leavitt at quarterback, who is just absolutely dominating. I saw this stat today, and I couldn't believe it. It's a Pro Football Focus stat, so take it for what it's worth.
Okay.
Among all redshirt freshmen and true freshmen, Sam Leavitt is number 1. He is ahead of Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State and everybody else. That blew my mind. But it doesn't surprise me because he's had 9 touchdowns to 0 interceptions over the last 3 weeks, 3 touchdowns in every game. Receiver Jordan Tyson, number 1, has more receiving yards over the last 4 games than anybody else in the country. Another really good secret that's kept for them. We all know who Cam Skattebo is. I call him the people's running back for a reason. He's really good. And those 3 can win you a lot of games. The defense has been described as bend but don't break. And I don't think that's a fair comparison. When I think bend but don't break, to me, that's giving up 500 yards and finding a way to get off the field and, like, oh man, we were able to get a sack and not force a punt kind of thing. ASU's defense is, we just had a really bad drive. Next drive, we're going to force a turnover. Boom, they force a turnover. Last drive of the game. Okay, we can't let them score and tie it. Boom, they hold them off. It's not a bend but don't break defense. It's a defense that rises to the occasion. So my keys to victory here: offense, don't change too much up. Sam Leavitt's dealing. Cam Skattebo should be back to 100% health after playing a little banged up last week. Should be good on offense. Defense, just find a way to continue to rise up to the occasion when it matters.
Now, Cam Skattebo, speaking from the BYU perspective, terrifies me because I think any BYU fan who watched the Utah-Arizona State game watched Cam Skattebo just tear up one of the best, maybe the best defense BYU has seen to date, because Utah's defense made life miserable for BYU for a lot of that game, and they were able to grind out the victory. But Cam Skattebo, you got to slow him down. Now, BYU's defense over the past few games, especially last week against Devin Neal and the Kansas Jayhawks, BYU's defense did what they needed to do. They held Kansas to less than half of what they typically rush for in that game. They have to have the same type of performance against ASU if they want to win this game. You cannot allow Skattebo and company to get loose on you. The other thing defensively is you got to get pressure on Sam Leavitt. And BYU fans, they know the Leavitt family name because Dallin, his older brother, played at BYU for a time. Jared, their father, played at BYU in the 90s. He's a BYU legacy. And he visited BYU in the offseason when he was in the transfer portal, ultimately opted to go to ASU, and he's tearing it up. But they got to get pressure on him. They've got to make him see ghosts, use that expression out there, and we'll see if they can do that with their pass rush. Now, offensively, BYU struggled mightily in the red zone last week. 4 trips inside the 20, Richie, came away with just 6 points. That's why they lost that game to Kansas. 17-13, and had you scored a darn touchdown in any of those trips, you win the dang football game. It's a simple, I don't mean to break it down, but they got to rediscover their scoring prowess. The last 5 quarters, they have a grand total of 3 offensive touchdowns. If they cannot find a way to generate touchdowns in the red zone, they're in trouble. So that is the key number 1 for BYU offensively, is find a way to get 6 when you get down in scoring territory.
That's always the case, man. Being able to finish your drives.
Yeah.
It's not time of possession. Time of possession, there's times where it is the most overrated stat in football.
Well, and right now, BYU can tell you it's absolutely overrated because they've had pretty good time of possession, but have minimal points to show for all that TOP, as they say. So right. It'll be an interesting one. Well, Richie, where can people find you from the BYU side of things if they want to check out more of your work, catch up with the Sun Devils a little bit more?
You guys can always check me out at Richie Brads 36. That's Brads with a Z 36. You can always listen to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast as well, but I love talking ball. So if you guys want to talk football, if you want to talk smack, if you want to, maybe talk smack about Utah together. I know ASU's not really big fans of the Utes either. We can bond over that. So hit me up. I love talking ball.
Cougar fans will take you up on that. I can assure you
I promise you. Utah fans went straight for my throat this offseason. And I was like, I have supported you guys as former Pac-12 teams. Like, okay, yeah, gloves can come off.
Okay, I like that. Well, Cougar fans, rally to Richie's side. Help him out. But hey, if you're an ASU Sun Devil fan, you want more on BYU, check out my podcast, Locked On Cougars, all things BYU every single day, much like Locked On Sun Devils. Check it out on social media as well, Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And then if you want, I'm with Richie. I love talking ball. Search me out. I'm at Jacob C. Hatch. I do a lot of stuff in terms of my sports radio up here in Salt Lake City. So join us. And obviously, thank you to all of you for tuning in every single day, making Locked On Sun Devils and Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen. And as always, thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.